Welcome to Salento With Love. I'm Davide Mengoli, episode 6 of remote purchasing. Now, you're well ahead of your purchasing process. You have identified the property and you have engaged the services of a legal or an attorney to make sure that the due diligence gets carried out. Now, as part of the due diligence process, one of the elements that very often gets left a little bit behind or forgotten, it's getting a geometra or an architetto. The word geometra is probably a figure that doesn't really appear in many other countries, but it's just a very qualified person, a technician who works almost on the same basis of an architect. So you can actually get a geometra to do what an architect does in 90% of the cases. Now, what are we talking about? Well, we are talking about the importance of getting your property surveyed. And you think, yes, I want my property surveyed. Well, I must say from experience, after doing this for quite a number of years, sometimes some clients have a view of what a surveyor is actually doing. Well, let me just tell you through these videos what really is the role of a geometra or an architect when gets engaged by your attorney or by us or you directly to inspect the property and carry out a survey. Normally banks that lend money would want a survey to really establish a couple of elements which are very, very important if they're borrowing money. Well, remember the principle, the lawyer or the attorney as well as the notary, they're not going to come out from their offices and go and check on the property on your behalf. So really, you're counting on the word of the realtor that is actually saying that everything is in order. So the surveyor is extremely important in making sure that he becomes your eyes, your ears, your hands from a technical point of view in establishing if the elements of transferring the title deed of the property are there. So what are we really talking about? Well, we are talking about a surveyor or a geometra who, under your instructions, would visit the property. Or in majority of the cases, these guys here, they work for the major banks that are lending money. So they get instructed by the bank to go and check and making sure that the title and the property can be transferred. Now, what do they really look for when a geometra or an architect does a survey? And this is really the important part. Well, through the course of this series, we'll talk about also the visura catastale, the cadastral sheet, and also the planimetria catastale, which is the actual floor plan of the property that is registered with the cadastral. So we'll be talking about that. But then really sometimes there is a little bit of a confusion between what is actually on the cadastral sheet and what is physically there as the property. So the responsibility of a geometra or an architect or a surveyor is to establish, first of all, if what is on the cadastral sheet and what is on the floor plan sheet of the cadastral is actually in line with the property. This is the number one role of the surveyor. We did a Q&A probably a couple of years ago where we actually did a survey and we were there on site with the geometra. So perhaps you want to pick up on that particular Q&A that we did to have a little bit more in-depth information. But really the job of a surveyor in this particular case is to turn up on site and check and see if the doors are in the place that they should be, the windows are in the place that they should be, if any internal walls and the distribution of the space within the property is being changed according to the cadastral plan. If two properties have come together, fused, for example, if there is a little room up on the roof, a little garage, if you're talking about a property in the countryside, well, the problem in many cases, in my experience, gets amplified because you think, well, I'm in the countryside, I'm gonna build a little shelter for the dogs, and then I'm gonna build a little garage, and then I'm gonna build something where I can put my tools in. And then, you know what, I may want to do a pool, so I'm going to dig into a pool. I'm in the countryside, I've got all this land, I do whatever I like. Well, in many cases, when it comes to the properties in outside the urban environment, the problem can be amplified, and the importance of having a surveyor establishing that can be very important. Now, this is why banks really invest in making sure that their funds, their money, because they are lending the money, are protected. Well, even more so if you're a cash buyer, if you're buying a property with your own funds, you want to protect your funds. So the idea of getting a geometer or an architect to go and inspect the property on your behalf and making sure that the cadastral informations are aligned, and if that is not the case, what is it, the responsibility? Well, the responsibility is through the surveyor to say exactly what is wrong and what needs to be done in order to align the property cadastrally. This is, I would say, the number one reason that you will have a geometer or an architect to inspect and survey a property. Well, in many cases, I'm sure in your country it's very similar. A surveyor is not a technician, he's not a plumber, he's not an engineer, he's not an electrician, and so sometimes this view of a surveyor inspecting a property, it's something that is not really the reality, it's not what happens. In many cases, you'll find that surveyor would turn things on and off, they would take photograph of a switch and they would say it's got a slight crack, and well, that's not really the type of survey that we are talking about here. If you're purchasing a property remotely, the number one element that you really want to make sure is that the property is cadastrally right. So then when you are in front of the notary, or whoever is representing you in front of the notary can sign, and you can purchase a property that it's 100% fine, and also allows you to resell the property without too many issues. Now, obviously, the surveyor will pick up on situations and the call is very much yours. If you have a situation of a house in the countryside and somebody's built a garage to put some tools inside, well, technically the surveyor would say that garage shouldn't be there. But remember, you're a cash buyer. So the reality is no one is going to come and say, take that garage down. So it's your choice. You could tell the vendor, look, I will buy the property, but can you please get rid of the garage? And they may decide to do so, or they may charge you for it. But you're also in an informed position. You can make that decision if you want to keep some elements of a property which potentially they are borderline. But it's very important to understand and to be aware of what your position is. Now, that's really the role of a surveyor. So if you are actually engaging the services of an attorney, you would find that an attorney in many cases will actually say, we would like to have a surveyor to just inspect the property just to make sure that we are aligned on everything. What could be the other responsibility of a surveyor? Obviously, when they're there visiting a property, sometimes only for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, a surveyor like this, well, for an average property may cost you 200, 300, 400 euros. So they're probably there for about 10, 15, 20 minutes. Then they need to put all the report together and they need to stamp it and send it to you. So there is quite a little bit of work that they've got to do. Obviously, while they're there, they will keep an eye out for everything that it's super obvious. If there is a big crack on the wall, that will go down. If there is a huge element of issue with the dump or rising dump, that will go down. And perhaps also what could potentially be done to improve that particular issue that the property has. But the surveyor is not going to test your air conditioning system, is not going to test your flushing system of your toilets and bathrooms, is not going to check the drainage, is not going to check the sewer, is not going to check the electrical board, is not going to check any of that, because like we said earlier, your surveyor is not a technician. It's just somebody who's going there with a huge amount of experience and the knowledge, being a geometer or an architect, with the knowledge that they have, and highlight the things that are extremely obvious. Now, you may say to me, Davide, we are purchasing a property, it's worth $1 million, it's worth 2 million. And really, we want to make sure that all those things that you are saying that are not included in the survey are included. What do I do? Well, you may have to speak to your realtor agent, and they may have to find a heating engineer who's actually prepared to go and inspect the system and do a report, finding a qualified electrician that is prepared to inspect the system of that particular property and create a report. Because, like we were saying, a geometer or an architect, they don't have the technical abilities of doing so. So, what really is the importance of having a surveyor when you are purchasing a property remotely? Well, I would say regardless if you're purchasing a property remotely or if you're physically here on the ground, the importance of having a surveyor when you are purchasing a property in Italy is to make sure that the land registry is aligned with your property. And if that is not the case, I can guarantee you there are so many tools in place for the vendor before transferring the title to make sure that the property is straightened out and is put in a position that when you are acquiring that property, you can also resell the property, or even so doing work to the property. Because a little element that is so important when you're purchasing a property, if the property is not cadastrally right, what happens is when you put a plan in to do any remodeling to the property, the local authority will ask you for a floor plan as it is right that moment. And if that is not in line with the plan that they have there, then immediately you're going to come across some major issue that may stop you from continuing with the work, and also some other issues that may develop. Very important to get the surveyor that makes sure that the property, cadastrally speaking, is 100% right, and if it's not, the vendor will put it right. And if you have an attorney on your side, well, the attorney will have all the munition in their hands to make sure that they can push the vendor to put things right, or the realtor to make sure that things are put right. So, well, I hope this is right. Well, does it make a difference really who are you using? Remote purchasing, if you are using Salento With Love services, I always recommend to use a surveyor for a few €100. It's worth it. You have a report that is worth keeping. If you are purchasing a property by yourself in Italy and you are in the hands of a realtor, well, the purpose of this video is stop for a moment and ask the realtor to instruct a geometer to carry a survey on the property. And that will tell you exactly what the situation is, and then you can move it forward. Fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed episode 6 of remote purchasing. Remember, purchasing a property is a big responsibility, and you want to make sure that you pick up an asset and not a liability. Episode 7, well, we're going to dive in even more into the due diligence, into the paperwork that you are really looking, and trying to explain what is it that you're looking at. So when the realtor attorney or the surveyor is communicating with you, you can have some background knowledge to answer back. Fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed episode 6, and I'll see you on episode 7. Until then, stay safe wherever you are.